So the moment we have all been waiting for is finally here. After all of these training camp practices, all of these preseason games, the Packers' 53-man roster has finally been announced. It came out on the Packers website, packers.com, put out by Wes Hodquist. The title is Packers Keep 6 Receivers, 11 Defensive Linemen. Here's the initial 2024 roster. Now at quarterback, we have Jordan Love and Malik Willis, pending a physical. Released quarterbacks Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt. So that news yesterday with Malik Willis getting traded to the Packers from the Titans for a 7th-round pick was pretty shocking. I thought the Packers would decide to stick with Pratt. I liked how he looked overall, better than Sean Clifford. But they decide to make the move to bring in Malik Willis, which I like. I think he's an insanely talented player with a ton of upside. And if you lose Jordan Love, you're in a tough position regardless. So I fully understand trading a 7th-round pick to bring in a guy who has more upside than Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt. I did see some news, I think it was by Jacob Easton, I believe his name is, on X, saying that Clifford is expected to be brought back to the practice squad and not Michael Pratt. And when you look at that decision, Sean Clifford does have more experience, and so that could be why the Packers would want him on the practice squad and not Michael Pratt. I still think in the long run, Pratt will be better overall, but that's the Packers' decision here at the quarterback position. Now running back, this is another spot where there is some potential questions with A.J. Dillon. So A.J. Dillon does not make the roster. He gets placed on the injured reserve. Josh Jacobs, Marshawn Lloyd, and Emmanuel Wilson make the Packers roster. And I need to read to you at the bottom here. They share some important information about these injuries, specifically A.J. Dillon. It says running back A.J. Dillon, neck, and tight end Tyler Davis, shoulder, were placed on injured reserve but didn't receive the return designation. Their 2024 seasons are over. So that is very, very sad news for A.J. Dillon, who is dealing with that stinger, something he also dealt with, I believe it was to end last season. And that means that Dillon is not going to be able to play this year. So that is pretty surprising. We didn't know the extent of his injury when it came out. The Packers were still awaiting tests. You could tell, though, from the comments from Matt LaFleur, from A.J. Dillon, I was somewhat worried about the extent of the injury because of the comments I shared on this channel. And now it looks like it's a pretty bad injury for Dillon, and he's on the IR, not going to play this entire season. So that's a somewhat, I would say, surprising situation here, because I wouldn't have thought he would have missed the whole year. I thought maybe he would miss the first 4 weeks, but that is not the case. And that means that Marshawn Lloyd makes the roster, and he's not on the IR, so that's good news. So he should be able to be back in the first couple weeks, hopefully. And that means that Emmanuel Wilson makes the roster. I love Emmanuel Wilson. I had, thought that he had a really good preseason last year, was one of the best running backs this preseason. He's explosive, he's talented, and so I like that there. He's going to be the Packers' 3rd running back. And depending on Marshawn Lloyd's injury, his hamstring, we could see some more from Emmanuel Wilson earlier in the season. So that's what we have there. Now to wide receiver. We have Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, Malik Heath, and Bo Melton. So Grant Dubose does not make the roster, even though he had such an incredible game in the first week of preseason. After that, I was debating, could Dubose make the roster? He didn't quite have as much of production later in the preseason. And so the Packers stick with Malik Heath, who I think looked really good the past couple games, as well as Bo Melton, who is just such a fast, talented receiver. Was an important piece later in the season last year for the Packers, was their first 100-yard receiver last year. And so that's the 6 there. Now at tight end, we have Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, and Ben Sims. And Tyler Davis is placed on the IR. And I believe with Tyler Davis, as I already read, he's also not able to return. So his entire season is over, which is tough for him because, he also missed last year with an injury. So that's just very unfortunate. Injuries are the worst part of the NFL. And so the Packers stick with 3 tight ends. Now to offensive line. Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Rasheed Walker, Zach Tom, Jordan Morgan, Sean Ryan, Andre Dillard, Jacob Monk, Kadeem Telfort, and Travis Glover. They release Royce Newman, Packers' former 4th-round pick from a few years ago. He had slowly declined over his time here in Green Bay. Caleb Jones released, Luke Tenuta released, Lecitus Smith released, and Donovan Jennings, the undrafted free agent, also released. So in my prediction for the Packers roster, I had them keeping 9 offensive linemen. I talked about how I was debating the 10th with Kadeem Telfort. But based on the other positions, I had them keeping 9. Telfort makes the roster there. He did have a pretty solid preseason, so that's not really doesn't shock me that he also makes the roster, even though I didn't have him making the roster. And then Jacob Monk, draft pick, has played well. Travis Glover, also 6th-round draft pick, and I wouldn't expect Gutekunst to cut that guy this early in his career, being a 6th-round pick. It's close. Sometimes a 7th-round pick is released. It depends. But that's the offensive line. And I think it's fine there. Royce Newman, he's just struggled recently, and so that's not the end of the world having him leave. But obviously for all these guys, it's a tough situation to be released. So I wish them nothing but the best wherever else they end up. And then looking back to the first few, just sort of going back on my predictions, I obviously did not get the quarterback right. I had them going Love and Michael Pratt. I did not have Malik Willis coming out of nowhere. Should have saw that one coming. And then at tight end, I had them keeping Tyler Davis as well, but he's on the injured reserve. And I got the running backs correct there for those 3. But then to the defense now. Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, this is defensive end. Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, Lucas Van Ness, Kingsley Enagbare, Brenton Cox Jr., and Aaron Mosby. So the Packers keep 6. I had them keeping 5 with Aaron Mosby. I left off Brenton Cox, but that's cool to see Aaron Mosby made the roster. He was making some plays in preseason. The past game had that sack fumble, had that interception. I just think that the great plays he's had, what he's done this preseason, earned him this roster spot. And Brenton Cox also makes this spot. So a pretty deep room, I would say, at defensive end for the Packers. And then defensive tackle, Kenny Clark, TJ Slayton, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, and Colby Wooden. So I think that was probably one of the easier or most predictable positions at defensive tackle, just based off of last year and what we had this year. And then Jonathan Ford on the IR, designated to return. And then James Esther, Spencer Wegg, and Keontae Shad released from this roster. Then inside linebacker, Quay Walker, Isaiah McDuffie, Eric Wilson, Ezra Cooper, Tyron Hopper released. Christian Welch, Christian Young, and Chris Russell, wave/injured Raylan Goforth. So I had Christian Welch to make it 6. He does not make the roster, so we're surprised about that. He had been playing really well. Also a big special teams guy last year, so I thought they would keep him, but apparently that's not the case. And it's good to see Edgerrin Cooper is not placed on the IR. He is... I don't know how long it's going to be till he's fully able to play, because he had been coming back a little bit, but that's good there. And not really surprises with any of those 5. Isaiah McDuffie, Eric Wilson ahead of Edgerrin early in camp, and then Tyron Hopper, 3rd-round pick. So that's what we have there. Then cornerback, Jair Alexander, Eric Stokes, Keyshawn Nixon, Carrington Valentine, and Corey Ballantyne. So Robert Rochelle does not make it, Kalen King does not make it, and Jemin Green also does not make it. I had Kalen King making it as a 7th-rounder. Thought he had some nice plays to end the preseason. Thought the Packers could keep him, but they decide to release him. I had them releasing Corey Ballantyne and keeping Kalen King just because I thought they had some depth with Javon Bullard's ability to go to the slot. We saw Keyshawn Nixon play outside a little bit during camp. I thought maybe they would keep King instead just for some potential slot corner snaps in the future with Kalen King over Ballantyne, but they decided to keep Corey Ballantyne, and he did have a lot of experience last year, was okay at corner, so I get it for when it comes to having some depth and some experience at the outside corner spot. And then safety, Xavier McKinney, Javon Bullard, Evan Williams, Zane Anderson, and Keaton Oladapo. They released Anthony Johnson Jr. and Benny Sapp III. Honestly, out of all these moves, outside of the A.J. Dillon injury, I may say releasing Anthony Johnson Jr. may be the most surprising to me, just because to start training camp, he was one of those guys, filling in when it came to, or switching off with Javon Bullard and Evan Williams as the starting safety. And so to see him completely not make the roster, that surprises me. I would have thought that he could have made it over Zane Anderson and potentially Keaton Oladapo, even though Oladapo is a draft pick, 5th round. Anthony Johnson Jr. was a 7th-round pick last year, and he was making some nice plays, playing really well in the final preseason game, so that surprises me, but you can't keep everyone. The Packers, I think Zane Anderson's probably a big special teams guy, so that must be the decision there. When it comes down to your 4th and 5th safety, maybe you want a guy that you trust more on special teams. So interesting. Then specialists here. We got Daniel Whelan. He was the only punter here. No shock there. Greg Joseph is the Packers kicker, at least right now. Obviously, all this could change. All these players, any of these players could be released in the future. This is just the initial 53-man roster. And Anders Carlson released. We talked about that earlier today, or I talked about that on this channel. I had them keeping Anders. I thought that they would stick with him too long and, go a little longer, even though he missed that 32-yarder. But they've decided to cut ties, admit that their decision to draft him in the 6th round was not the best move, considering they are now releasing him a little over 1 year later. Greg Joseph being the kicker now. And we'll see. Part of me would hope that they would bring someone else in if they find someone out there. But for now, Greg Joseph is the kicker. And then Matt Orzech is the long snapper. And then finally here, another injury note. It says the Packers placed defensive lineman Jonathan Ford on injured reserve with a designation to return, exercising the NFL's new option to place up to 2 players directly on injured reserve with a designation to return this season. In the past, Ford would have needed to be carried on the initial 53-man roster before going on IR in order to be eligible for the designation to return. So those are all of the picks. All in all, I'm there's not a ton of surprises. There's a few here and there. Look at safety. As I said, I had the Packers keeping Anthony Johnson Jr. They let him go. I didn't have him keeping Zane Anderson. Then at kicker, I had him keeping Anders. That didn't happen. And Greg Joseph is the kicker now. So that's pretty much it. If you guys want more Packers content, feel free to subscribe down below, and I'll see you guys next time.